I died on my 33rd birthday, choking on a piece of cake my sister-in-law made especially for me. I remember everything about that moment with crystalline clarity. The way the dining room light caught the silver happy birthday banner Rebecca had hung that morning. The weight of the fork in my hand trembling from the neuropathy that had plagued me for months. The taste of chocolate and almond, sweet and bitter on my tongue. The way they all stood around the table watching. My husband Marcus was closest to me, phone already in his hand. Not to call 911, I realized that even as my throat began to close, but to film. His face was calm, almost detached, like he was documenting something clinical and necessary. Later, I would understand that he was. He needed proof that I'd eaten the cake voluntarily, that I'd smiled and thanked Rebecca for making my favorite dessert, that there was no foul play, just a tragic accident, a woman with severe allergies who'd somehow forgotten to ask about ingredients. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, stood at the head of the table, her Cartier bracelet catching the light as she lifted her wine glass to her lips. She was wearing that thin smile she always wore when she thought she'd won something. Her eyes were cold, calculating, watching me with the same expression she used when closing a particularly profitable real estate deal. My sister Diane was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention. She'd never liked me much, but I'd assumed it was just sibling rivalry, the natural friction between two women who'd grown up competing for our mother's limited affection. I hadn't realized she'd been in on it, that she'd known exactly what was in that cake and had come to my birthday party specifically to witness my death. My brother Daniel sat beside his fiancée Rebecca, his face pale and sweaty. His hands were shaking. Of all of them, Daniel looked the most uncomfortable, the most human. But he didn't stand up, didn't call for help, didn't do anything but sit there and watch as his baby sister's face turned purple. And Rebecca. Sweet, pregnant Rebecca with her hand on her rounded belly and tears already forming in her eyes. Such perfect tears, I thought as my vision began to darken. Such a gifted actress. She'd probably practiced in the mirror, getting the expression just right. Grief-stricken but brave. Devastated but strong. She was the one who'd made the cake. She was the one who'd ground the almonds so fine I wouldn't notice the texture. She was the one who'd called me 3 days earlier to ask about my favorite dessert, who'd insisted on baking it herself because family should do special things for family. She was the one I'd named as primary beneficiary on my $2 million life insurance policy. That had been 6 months ago. 6 months since my mother had sat beside my hospital bed, her hand cold and papery on mine, and guided my signature across the beneficiary change form. Family takes care of family, she'd said, her voice soft and reasonable. Rebecca's going to have a baby. Your niece or nephew. You're so sick, sweetheart. The doctors say you only have a few months left. Don't you want to make sure something good comes from this tragedy? Don't you want your death to mean something? I'd been so sick then. The cancer, stage 4, aggressive, terminal, had hollowed me out, turned me into something skeletal and weak. The chemotherapy had stolen my hair, my strength, my hope. I could barely hold the pen my mother pressed into my hand. But what about Marcus? I'd whispered. My husband, my partner, the man I'd loved since college. Marcus had been there too, standing at the foot of my bed with his arms crossed. He'd laughed when I asked. Actually laughed like the question was absurd. Baby, I'll be fine, he'd said, his voice warm and reassuring. I've got the house, the cars, the business. This isn't about me. This is about doing the right thing. Rebecca and Daniel, they're just starting out. They need help. And with a baby on the way... He'd trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. I was dying anyway. What did it matter who got the money? Rebecca had cried then. Such pretty tears streaming down her perfect face. She'd taken my other hand, squeezing gently. You don't have to do this, she'd said, but her eyes had been bright with hope. Greedy. I know it's a lot to ask, but we'd be so grateful, and I promise, we'll use it to give the baby a good life. A better life than Daniel and I could provide on our own. We'll tell them all about their Aunt Alice. We'll make sure they know what you did for them. We'll name them after you, if it's a girl. Alice Elizabeth Chen Morrison. It would be an honor. I'd signed. My hand had shaken so badly the signature was barely legible, but I'd signed. I was dying anyway. What did it matter? Except I wasn't dying. Not really. 3 weeks after I signed the beneficiary change form, I'd overheard Rebecca on the phone in my own guest bathroom. I'd been shuffling down the hallway with my IV pole, weak and exhausted from another round of chemotherapy, when I'd heard her voice through the door. The doctor said the almonds should do it, she'd been saying, her voice clinical and calm. Ground fine enough in the cake batter, she won't even taste them. Her allergy is severe enough that even with an EpiPen nearby, the anaphylaxis should be fatal, especially given how weak she is from the cancer treatments. It'll look completely natural. An accident. She just forgot to ask about ingredients. I'd frozen in the hallway, my hand gripping the IV pole so hard my knuckles went white. No, Marcus knows, Rebecca had continued. He's the one who suggested the birthday cake. More believable than a regular dinner. More emotional. And Eleanor has the documentation ready. Proof that Alice was informed about managing her allergies, information packets from her doctor about being careful with food. If anyone questions it, we'll say she'd been getting forgetful from the medications. Which is true, honestly. She's been a mess lately. A pause, then, the baby? Oh, honey, there is no baby. Well, there is, but it's not Daniel's, it's Marcus's. Has been from the start. But Daniel doesn't know that yet. He won't find out until after Alice is dead and we can dump him. I'm not spending my life with a broke middle manager when I could have Marcus and $2 million. I'd stood there in that hallway for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My mind had been racing, trying to process what I'd heard, trying to understand how the world I'd thought I knew had actually been a carefully constructed lie. Rebecca and Marcus, having an affair, planning my murder, using my brother as a cover story and my insurance policy as their reward. I should have run, should have called the police, should have confronted them, fought back, done something. Instead, I'd shuffled back to my room and climbed into bed. I'd pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out what to do. But I was so tired, so sick, so broken. And some part of me, some deep, damaged part, had believed them, believed I was the problem, believed I was a burden, believed that my death would actually be a relief to everyone around me. The cancer diagnosis had been devastating, yes, but in some ways it had also been almost validating. It explained why I'd been so tired all the time, why my hair had been thinning, why I'd been losing weight. It gave a name to the suffering I'd been enduring for years. It made me special, important, worthy of attention and care. Except it was all a lie. I'd figured that out later. Much later. Too late. The cancer diagnosis had been wrong. Dr. Harrison had made a mistake, not through malice, but through negligence. A contaminated biopsy, a mix-up in the lab. By the time we'd discovered the error 6 months later, the damage had been done. The chemotherapy I didn't need had destroyed my immune system. The radiation I hadn't required had damaged my organs. And I'd been so weak from the unnecessary treatments that when the real poisoning started, no one noticed. My mother had started it. I remembered now with the perfect clarity that came with dying. I remembered her concerned face as she'd handed me supplements that were supposed to help with the chemo side effects. Vitamins, she'd said. Herbal remedies. Ancient Chinese medicine passed down through generations. They'd made my hair fall out faster, made my hands shake, made me confused and forgetful. Mercury, I would learn later. Small doses, carefully calibrated. Not enough to kill me quickly, but enough to make me look like I was dying from cancer. Marcus had been in on it too. He'd made my morning smoothies, adding just a touch of antifreeze to the mix. Not enough that I could taste it, just enough to keep me sick. Eleanor had orchestrated everything, pulling strings and manipulating people like a puppet master. She'd connected my mother's money problems with Marcus's failing business with Rebecca's greed and created a perfect storm of murder. And I'd been the target, the sacrifice, the acceptable loss in their grand scheme. So when Rebecca had served me that birthday cake, chocolate with raspberry filling, my favorite, she'd said, I'd eaten it. I'd smiled and thanked her and taken a big bite. I'd let it happen. Because some broken part of me had believed I deserved it. The almond paste had stuck in my throat, I'd felt my airway closing, felt the panic rising. I'd looked around the table at my family, waiting for someone to help. No one had moved. Marcus had kept filming. Eleanor had kept smiling. Daniel had kept shaking. Rebecca had started crying on cue. And I'd died. I died on my 33rd birthday, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me, knowing with absolute certainty that they'd murdered me for money. My last thought had been a wish, a desperate dying wish. I want another chance. I want to do it differently. I want to fight back. And then I woke up. I was 25 years old, sitting in Dr. Harrison's office, listening to him say the word cancer for the first time. My hands were young, unshaking. My nails were painted a soft pink. I remembered this manicure, remembered getting it done with Diane the week before, remembered how we'd laughed and gossiped and acted like sisters who actually liked each other. My hair was thick and dark, falling past my shoulders in waves. My body felt strong, healthy, alive in a way I'd almost forgotten. This was before the poisoning, before the fake diagnosis destroyed me, before I'd become the weak, compliant victim they'd needed me to be. Dr. Harrison was still talking, explaining staging and treatment options and survival rates. His voice was somber, professional, kind. He had no idea he was wrong. No idea his mistake would cost me 8 years of my life, or would have if I'd let it. "Miss Chen," he said, and I realized he'd asked me a question. I blinked, focusing on his face. He looked concerned, sympathetic. He thought I was in shock. He had no idea. "I need a second opinion," I heard myself say. The words came out steady, controlled. "I need another biopsy. I need comprehensive blood work. I stopped, thinking fast. In my first life, I'd accepted this diagnosis without question. I'd been scared and compliant and trusting. I'd let Dr. Harrison and his staff guide me through treatment after treatment, never thinking to verify that I actually had cancer in the first place. This time would be different. "I need you to refer me to an oncologist at University Hospital," I said. "I want a full panel of tests, and I want my biopsy sample retested at an independent lab." Dr. Harrison frowned. "Miss Chen, I understand this is frightening, but our lab is perfectly capable—" "I'm sure it is," I interrupted, keeping my voice polite but firm. "But this is my life. I want multiple opinions. I want verification. I'm sure you understand." He did understand, though he wasn't happy about it. But he couldn't refuse. Patients had the right to second opinions, to independent verification, to taking control of their own medical care. He wrote the referrals. I thanked him and left. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and shook, not from fear, from fury. From the crystalline rage that came with knowing exactly what had been done to me and having the power to stop it before it started. I knew things now. I knew Dr. Harrison's lab tech, a woman named Susan Chen, no relation, had a drinking problem and frequently made mistakes. I knew the biopsy sample that was supposed to be mine had been contaminated with tissue from another patient. I knew that patient, a woman named Margaret Holbrook, actually did have stage 4 cancer and that she would die 6 months from now, never knowing her disease had been wrongly attributed to someone else. I knew all of this because I'd lived it. Because I'd spent months in cancer support groups with Margaret, bonding over our shared diagnosis, supporting each other through chemo. Because I'd been at her funeral, weak and sick myself, wondering why my cancer wasn't progressing the way hers had. This time, I would make sure the mistake was caught early. This time, Margaret would get her correct diagnosis and maybe have a fighting chance. And I would get my life back. I drove home to the apartment I shared with Marcus. It was small, cramped, filled with his things more than mine. We'd been married for 2 years in this timeline. I'd loved him desperately, completely, with the blind faith of someone who'd never been betrayed before. Now, looking at our apartment with the perspective of 8 years and a lifetime of hurt, I saw it differently. I saw how he'd slowly isolated me from my friends, how he'd encouraged me to quit my job at the marketing firm to focus on us, how he'd managed our finances, keeping me on an allowance while he spent freely on his startup. I saw the control, the manipulation, the groundwork for murder. Marcus came home an hour after I did. He was handsome, charming, smiling as he kissed my cheek and asked about my doctor's appointment. "It's cancer," I said flatly. His face fell, Perfect concern, perfect sympathy. If I hadn't known better, I would have believed it was real. Oh, baby, he said, pulling me into his arms. Oh, no, 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 no. I let him hold me, feeling nothing but revulsion. What did the doctor say? He asked. What's the prognosis? I'm getting a second opinion, I said, pulling away. Multiple opinions, actually. I want to make sure they're right. Something flickered in his eyes. Annoyance? Concern? I couldn't tell. That's smart, he said slowly. But Dr. Harrison is a good doctor. I'm sure if he says, I want to be certain, I said firmly. This is too important to take chances. Of course, Marcus agreed. Well, whatever you need, I'm here for you. We'll get through this together. Lies, all lies. But I smiled and thanked him and let him think I believed it. The second opinion came back 2 weeks later. No cancer, no abnormalities. Perfect health, except for some concerning levels of heavy metals in my blood work. Mercury specifically. Consistent with long-term exposure. Have you been taking any supplements? The oncologist at University Hospital asked. Any herbal remedies or traditional medicines? I thought about my mother's vitamins, the pills she'd been giving me for months, claiming they'd help with my stress and fatigue. Yes, said, my mother has been giving me some supplements. Chinese herbal medicine. The doctor frowned. I'd like to test them if you don't mind. Some traditional remedies can be contaminated with heavy metals. It's not malicious. Often it's just poor quality control, but it can be dangerous. I gave him the bottle. It was tested. It came back positive for mercury at levels far exceeding safe limits. This could have killed you, the doctor said seriously. Long-term exposure like this can cause neurological damage, organ failure, death. You need to stop taking these immediately. And honestly, Miss Chen, I'd recommend reporting this to the FDA. Someone needs to investigate the supplier. I took the bottle back. I took the test results. I put them in a safe deposit box at a bank across town. One Marcus didn't know about. I didn't report anything to the FDA. I had bigger plans. I stopped taking my mother's supplements that day. I told her I'd switched to a new doctor who'd prescribed different vitamins. She looked disappointed, but didn't push. Within a week, I felt different, stronger. My headaches faded. The tremors in my hands stopped. I started sleeping through the night instead of waking up confused and disoriented. I started thinking clearly for the first time in months, and I started planning. See, here's the thing about living your life twice. You know what's coming. You know the exact sequence of events that will lead to your murder. You know who's involved, what they want, how they'll try to get it, and you can stop it, all of it. But that's not enough. Not for me. Not after what they'd done. I didn't just want to survive. I wanted revenge. I wanted them to suffer the way they'd made me suffer. I wanted them to lose everything the way they'd tried to make me lose my life. I wanted justice. So I started gathering evidence. First, I hired a private investigator. His name was James Riley, and in my first life, he'd been the one to finally piece together what had happened to me. 3 years after my death, when Rebecca's baby died of SIDS at 6 months old and Rebecca's mother hired him to investigate, convinced her daughter was somehow responsible. He'd been, right, Rebecca had smothered the baby, Marcus's baby, the child they'd murdered me to provide for, because it had been crying too much and interfering with her new lifestyle. She'd gotten away with it legally, but Riley had uncovered enough evidence to write a book about the case. That book, The Birthday Cake Murder, had been published 5 years after my death. It detailed everything. The insurance scheme, the poisoning, the fake cancer diagnosis, all of it. My family had been destroyed by the revelations, their reputations ruined, but they'd never faced legal consequences. The statute of limitations had run out. The evidence had been circumstantial. The prosecutors had declined to press charges. Justice denied. This time, I was creating justice myself. I met Riley at a coffee shop downtown. He was younger in this timeline, less cynical, still working out of a cramped office above a dry cleaner. But he had the same sharp eyes, the same relentless curiosity. I need surveillance, I told him, sliding a folder across the table. On these people. He opened the folder. Inside were photos and basic information on Marcus, Eleanor, my mother, Daniel, and Rebecca. Your family, he observed. Yes. Why? I could have lied, could have made up a story about suspected infidelity or financial fraud. But Riley was good at reading people, and I needed him to take this seriously. Because they're trying to kill me, I said quietly, and I need proof before they succeed. He studied my face for a long moment. That's a serious accusation. I have evidence. I pulled out another folder, the medical records showing mercury poisoning, the test results on my mother's supplements, documentation of Marcus's financial troubles and Eleanor's history of fraud. Riley read through everything slowly, thoroughly. When he finished, he looked at me with new respect. You've done your homework. I'm very motivated not to die. He smiled slightly, Meta. I can see that. What exactly are you looking for? Everything, I said. I want to know where they go, who they talk to, what they buy. I want bank records and phone records and medical records. I want to know every secret they have, every crime they've committed, every lie they've told. That's expensive. I have money. I did, not much. Marcus controlled most of our finances. But I'd been secretly saving for months, skimming small amounts from the household budget and selling jewelry he didn't know I had. And probably illegal, Riley added. I need to know if my family is trying to kill me, I said flatly. I need evidence I can use. I need leverage. Can you help me or not? He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, I'll look into it, but if I find evidence of a crime, especially conspiracy to commit murder, I'm obligated to report it. Not if you're working for my attorney, I said. Attorney-client privilege extends to work product. I've already retained a lawyer. You'll be working as his investigator. I slid a business card across the table. Thomas Kane, attorney at law. I'd hired him 2 days ago, paid his retainer with the last of my savings. Riley picked up the card, impressed despite himself. You really have thought of everything. I've had a lot of time to think, I said. Which was true in a way he couldn't understand. All right, he said, I'll do it, but I need an advance. I pulled out an envelope stuffed with cash. 10,000. Is that enough to start? He took the envelope. It'll do. While Riley worked, I started making my own moves. I went to a different doctor at a different hospital and got a comprehensive health screening. No cancer, no abnormalities. Perfect health except for the mercury poisoning, which was already fading now that I'd stopped taking my mother's supplements. I had the results sealed in my safe deposit box. Then I went to a financial advisor, not the one Eleanor had recommended to Marcus, but an independent one I'd found through research. I asked about life insurance. How much are you thinking? She asked. $2 million. She looked surprised. That's quite a bit for someone your age. What's the justification? My husband has a startup that could be very valuable, I lied, and I want to make sure he's protected if something happens to me. Does he have a policy on you already? No, but his mother suggested we both get coverage. The advisor nodded. That's smart. Let me pull some quotes for you. She did. The premiums were high. $2 million was a lot of coverage, but not impossible. Who would you want as beneficiary? She asked. In my first life, I would have said Marcus. Then, under pressure, I would have changed it to Rebecca. I want to set up a trust, I said instead. Everything goes to the trust, with specific instructions for distribution. What kind of instructions? If I die of natural causes before age 40, the money goes to my husband. If I die under suspicious circumstances, or if I die before age 35, everything goes to charity. Specifically to organizations that help victims of domestic violence and financial abuse. The advisor blinked. That's unusual. I want to make sure I'm protected, I said firmly. And I want to make sure that if something happens to me, my death benefits people who need help, not people who might profit from it. She understood then. She'd seen enough in her career to recognize the signs of financial abuse, the patterns of control. I think that's very smart, she said quietly. Let's set up that trust. Marcus found out about the policy 3 days after I signed it. Eleanor had connections at the insurance company. Of course she did. and they'd tipped her off. She'd called Marcus immediately, furious that I'd gotten coverage without naming him as beneficiary. He came home that evening in a rage. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, slamming the policy documents on the table. "A trust? What the fuck, Alice?" I looked up from my laptop, keeping my face calm. "It's a life insurance policy. Your mother said we should have coverage. She said you should name me as beneficiary, not some fucking trust." "The trust benefits you," I said. "If I die naturally, you get everything." "If you die naturally, what the fuck is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm being careful," I said. "I'm making sure my assets are protected." "Protected from what? From me?" "Yes," I thought, "exactly from you." "From uncertainty," I said aloud. "Marcus, I just got a cancer scare. It turned out to be nothing, thank God, but it reminded me that we never know what's going to happen. I want to make sure that if something happens to me, my money does some good in the world. I'm your husband. I should get the money." "You will," I said patiently. "If I die of natural causes. But if something suspicious happens—" "Suspicious? Are you out of your mind? Why would anything suspicious happen?" I stood up, facing him directly. "I don't know, Marcus. Why would it?" He stared at me, anger and confusion warring on his face. He couldn't understand what had changed. I'd always been so compliant, so easy to manipulate. Not anymore. "This is insane," he finally said. "You're being paranoid." "Maybe," I agreed. "But it's my policy, my choice. And it's done." He grabbed my arm, squeezing hard enough to leave bruises. "Change it." "No." "Alice, I'm serious." "Change the beneficiary or what?" I pulled away, and this time I let him see the coldness in my eyes. "Or you'll hurt me? Or you'll leave me? Go ahead, Marcus. Do your worst." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "Documenting," I said. "This is the second time you've grabbed me in anger. I'm keeping a record." His face went pale. He'd been careful in my first life, never leaving marks where anyone could see. But he'd miscalculated now, gotten sloppy because he was frustrated. "You're crazy," he said. "I'm protecting myself," I corrected. "Now get out of my way. I have work to do." He left, slammed the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the walls. I saved the recording and sent it to my attorney. Then I filed for a protection order. The protection order was denied. No history of violence, insufficient evidence, Marcus's lawyer argued, but the record existed now. The documentation of his anger, his threats, his physical aggression. It would matter later. In the meantime, I kept building my case. Riley called me 2 weeks into his investigation. "You were right," he said. "Your mother's been buying supplements from a dark web pharmacy. Not the ones she gave you. Those were probably just contaminated through negligence. But she's been researching mercury poisoning, antifreeze toxicity, untraceable poisons." My stomach turned, even though I'd known this was coming. "What else?" "Your brother's girlfriend, Rebecca, has been researching your medical records. She works at Mercy General, and she's been accessing your files without authorization." "That's illegal." "Very. She's also been researching life insurance policies, specifically how soon after death benefits can be claimed and what kind of documentation is required. She's planning ahead." "Seems like it," Riley agreed. "And your husband?" He paused. "What about Marcus?" "He's been having an affair with Rebecca for about 6 months now. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, flowers sent to her apartment. It's pretty clear." I closed my eyes. I'd known this. But hearing it confirmed still hurt. "There's more," Riley continued. "Your mother-in-law has been meeting with someone named Martin Cross. He's a former insurance fraud investigator who got fired for taking bribes. Now he consults on how to make insurance claims look legitimate. She's that confident I'll die." "She's planning for it," Riley said. "I've got recordings of her talking to your mother about timing. They want to wait until you've had the policy for at least a year. Makes it look less suspicious. But they're getting impatient. How impatient? Your mother asked Eleanor if they could accelerate the timeline. Eleanor said no, that they needed to wait, that rushing would raise red flags. But your mother's desperate, Alice. She's got debt. Serious debt. Credit cards, medical bills from your father's final illness, a second mortgage on her house. She's drowning. And there it was, the final piece. My mother hadn't poisoned me out of pure malice. She'd done it out of desperation, out of fear, out of the belief that my life was worth less than her financial security. It didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Send me everything, I said. Every recording, every receipt, every piece of evidence. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure they can't hurt me, I said. And then I'm going to destroy them. I spent the next 3 months becoming the perfect daughter-in-law, the perfect sister, the perfect daughter. I had lunch with Eleanor every week at the garden terrace. I smiled and laughed and pretended to adore her. I listened to her talk about her real estate empire, about Marcus's struggling startup, about how important family was, and I watched. I watched her accidentally knock my vitamin bottle off the table during our third lunch and replace it with an identical bottle from her purse. I palmed the pills later, had them tested. Mercury again, but higher doses this time. I documented everything. Photographed the switch, kept the bottles, sent samples to independent labs. I attended family dinners at my mother's house and watched her slip things into my food when she thought I wasn't looking. Ground up pills in my mashed potatoes. Strange powders in my soup. I palmed the bites, fed them to tissue paper I kept in my napkin, disposed of them. Later, I pretended to get weaker. I started acting confused, forgetful. I complained about headaches and fatigue. I gave them exactly what they wanted to see. And I recorded everything. I'd installed cameras in my mother's house, tiny ones, hidden in picture frames and smoke detectors. I got the footage of her crushing pills, mixing poisons, carefully poisoning her own daughter's food. It was damning, devastating, enough to put her in prison for 20 years. But I wasn't ready yet. I needed more. The confrontation with Rebecca came at month 4. Marcus had asked me to have lunch with her and Daniel. To celebrate the engagement, he'd said. They want you to be there. I'd agreed because that's what the compliant Alice would do. We met at a trendy bistro downtown. Rebecca looked radiant, her hand constantly moving to her stomach even though she was barely showing. Daniel looked tired, stressed. Marcus looked smug. Thank you for coming, Rebecca said warmly, hugging me. I felt her fingers on my wrist, checking my pulse. Medical instinct or something more calculated? I wouldn't miss it, I lied. We ordered food. Rebecca ordered for me without asking, a salad with almonds and strawberries. I can't eat almonds, I said pleasantly. I'm allergic. Rebecca's smile faltered. Oh, I forgot, sorry. She hadn't forgotten. She'd been testing me, seeing if I'd catch it, seeing if I was still alert enough to manage my own allergies. I ordered a different salad. No nuts. Over lunch, Marcus brought up the life insurance policy. Alice, Rebecca, and Daniel wanted to talk to you about something, he said. Rebecca looked embarrassed. It's not a big deal. We were just thinking Spit it out, Daniel said more aggressively than necessary. He'd been drinking already, I noticed. Day drinking. A habit he'd developed more seriously in my first life. Rebecca shot him a look, then turned to me with her sweetest smile. We're having a baby, she said. And we're so excited, but also terrified. The costs are enormous. Childcare, medical bills, everything. And Daniel and I were barely making ends meet. I can help, I offered. I have some savings, not much, but that's kind, Rebecca interrupted. But we were thinking of something more permanent, more secure. The life insurance policy, Marcus said bluntly. Rebecca should be the beneficiary. There it was. I looked around the table. Marcus watching me with cold calculation. Rebecca with fake sympathy. Daniel with desperate hope. Why? I asked simply. Because family helps family, Marcus said. Because Rebecca and Daniel need it more than some random charity. Because you love your brother and want to help him provide for his child. I do love Daniel, I said honestly, looking at my brother. Daniel, is this what you want? He looked away, unable to meet my eyes. Rebecca's right. We need help, and you're sick, Alice. The doctors said. The doctors were wrong, I interrupted. I don't have cancer. I'm fine. But you're still sick, Rebecca insisted. We can all see it. You're exhausted all the time. You're forgetting things. You're being poisoned. I finished quietly. Silence. What? Daniel said. I'm being poisoned, I repeated, louder now. Someone's been putting mercury in my supplements and antifreeze in my food, making me sick on purpose, making me look like I'm dying so I'll be easier to kill. Rebecca's face had gone white. Marcus looked furious. Daniel looked confused. That's insane, Marcus said. Is it? I pulled out my phone and opened a file. Because I have lab reports showing toxic levels of heavy metals in my system. I have test results on supplements that are supposed to be vitamin C, but are actually poison. I have footage of someone tampering with my food. I turned the phone to face them, showing the video of my mother crushing pills into powder. Daniel made a choking sound. You're paranoid, Rebecca said, but her voice was shaking. You're having some kind of breakdown? Marcus, she needs help. She needs to change that beneficiary, Marcus snapped. This is ridiculous, Alice. We're your family. We love you. Stop being so fucking selfish and do the right thing. I stood up. I need to use the restroom, I said calmly. Excuse me. I walked away from the table, feeling their eyes on my back. In the bathroom, I checked my phone. Riley had sent a text. Got it all. Clear audio, clear video. They're buried. I'd been recording the entire lunch. Every word, every accusation, every threat, evidence. I washed my hands, reapplied my lipstick, and walked back out. I'm not changing the beneficiary, I told them. Not now, not ever. And if you keep asking, I'll start wondering why you're all so invested in my life insurance policy. Why it matters so much to you that I'm worth more dead than alive. I left cash for my meal on the table and walked out. Marcus filed for divorce 2 weeks later. His lawyer claimed irreconcilable differences, mental instability, refusal to cooperate with reasonable family requests. They wanted spousal support, property division, everything. My lawyer, Thomas Kane, who was turning out to be worth every penny, laughed when he read the filing. They're desperate, he said. Your husband is broke. His business is failing and he needs money. He thought you'd be an easy mark. I was, I said. In another life. Kane looked at me strangely but didn't ask. We have a prenup. He gets nothing except what he brought into the marriage, which was debt and a failing startup. You keep your assets, your insurance policy, everything. He'll fight it. Let him fight, Kane said. We have documentation of his affair, his financial mismanagement, his threats. If he wants to drag this through court, we'll bury him. Marcus did fight. His mother hired him an expensive attorney. They filed motion after motion, trying to freeze my assets, trying to force me to hand over financial records, trying to delay the divorce. And all the while, Riley kept gathering evidence. The evidence was damning. Phone records showing thousands of texts between Marcus and Rebecca, starting months before her pregnancy was announced. Hotel receipts and restaurant bills charged to credit cards Marcus had hidden from me. Emails between Eleanor and Martin Cross discussing how to make my death look like natural causes. Bank statements showing my mother's desperate financial situation. Records of her purchasing mercury supplements from a dark web pharmacy. Screenshots of her search history, untraceable poisons, how to make someone look sick, life insurance fraud. Rebecca's medical records access logs showing dozens of unauthorized views of my files. Her search history, fatal allergies, anaphylaxis timeline, how long to wait before claiming insurance. And the videos. God, the videos. Eleanor switching my vitamin bottles, my mother poisoning my food, Rebecca and Marcus kissing in a hotel parking lot. All of them meeting at Eleanor's house. sitting around her expensive dining table, planning my death like it was just another business deal. "This is enough for criminal charges," Kane said when I showed him everything. "Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud, medical records violations. We could destroy them." "Not yet," I said. "Why not?" "Because I wanted them to suffer more first. Because I wanted them to lose everything, not just face prison. Because I wanted them to know what it felt like to be powerless and afraid. Because I want to watch them destroy themselves," I said aloud. Kane looked at me with something like respect. "You're playing a long game." "The longest," I agreed. The divorce was finalized on my 26th birthday. Marcus got nothing. No property, no assets, no spousal support. The prenup he'd insisted on, designed to protect his business from me, had protected me from him instead. He moved in with his mother, broke and furious. Rebecca had dumped him by then. The pregnancy had been revealed as Marcus's, not Daniel's, and Daniel had kicked them both out. Without the insurance money to look forward to, Rebecca had no interest in playing house with a broke, failed entrepreneur. She'd gotten an abortion and moved to a different state. Or so I'd heard. I didn't care enough to verify, but I wasn't done. Not even close. See, here's what I knew that they didn't. I knew the future. I knew every disaster, every scandal, every failure that was coming for them. And I could make sure those disasters happened right on schedule, or even earlier. I started with Rebecca. She'd gotten a new job at a hospital in California using forged references to hide her record of accessing my medical files without authorization. She thought she'd gotten away clean. I made one anonymous call to the California Medical Board. They investigated. They contacted Mercy General in my city. They found the unauthorized access logs. They found the falsified employment references. Rebecca was fired, blacklisted, and facing criminal charges within 6 weeks. Her nursing license was revoked. Her career was over. I heard she tried to sue the hospital for wrongful termination. The case was dismissed. She'd violated HIPAA, falsified documents, and committed medical privacy crimes. She had no grounds to stand on. Good. My mother was harder. Not because she was more careful, she wasn't. But because despite everything, some part of me still loved her. Still wanted to believe she could change. So I gave her a chance. I paid off her debts. Every single one. Credit cards, medical bills, the second mortgage on her house. It cost me almost everything I had left in savings, $40,000 that I'd been hoarding for my new life. But I wanted to see. I wanted to know if she'd been driven by desperation or by cruelty. If she could choose differently when the financial pressure was gone. I had the final statement sent to her house showing zero balances across the board. She called me the next day crying. "I don't understand," she said. "How? Who?" "I paid them," I said. "All of your debts. You're free now, Mom." Silence. Then, "Why would you do that?" "Because you're my mother," I said. "And I wanted to give you a choice. A real choice. Not one made out of desperation and fear." More crying. "Ugh. I don't deserve this. I don't deserve your kindness." "No," I agreed, Assange. "You don't. But I'm giving you a chance anyway. A chance to be the mother you should have been. A chance to choose differently." "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry. Alice, what I did, what I almost—" "I know," I said quietly. "I know exactly what you did, Mom. I know about the mercury. I know about Eleanor's plan. I know everything." She went silent, her breathing ragged on the other end of the line. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to therapy. I've already set up the appointments and paid for the first year with Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She specializes in financial trauma and family dysfunction. You're going to go every week. You're going to do the work. You're going to deal with your grief over Dad, your money anxiety, all the broken parts of you that let you think poisoning me was acceptable." "Okay," she whispered. "And if you ever try to hurt me again, or if you contact Eleanor or Marcus or participate in any scheme against me, I will turn over every piece of evidence I have to the police. every video, every lab result, every recorded conversation. And you will go to prison for attempted murder. Do you understand? Yes. Good. Your first therapy appointment is next Tuesday at 10 a.m. Don't miss it. I hung up. She went to therapy. I checked with Dr. Mitchell, who was bound by confidentiality but could confirm attendance. My mother went every week, sometimes twice a week. She did the work. Over the next months, I watched her change. Slowly, painfully, but genuinely. She started being honest about her feelings. She apologized, really apologized, not the manipulative non-apologies she'd given before. She started respecting boundaries. She started being a real mother. It wasn't perfect. I didn't trust her completely, but I could see her trying, and that was something. Eleanor was different. Eleanor would never change. Eleanor was a predator in designer clothes, and predators didn't deserve redemption. Predators deserve to be hunted. I waited. I was patient. I knew what was coming for Eleanor's real estate empire. In my first life, the collapse had started with a whistleblower, one of Eleanor's junior partners who'd grown a conscience. The investigation had taken 3 years, moving slowly through bureaucratic channels. This time, I was the whistleblower. And I wasn't slow. I knew exactly where Eleanor's crimes were buried. I knew about the bribed inspectors, the falsified environmental reports, the money laundering through offshore accounts. I knew about the luxury condo development built on toxic waste, the kickbacks to city council members, the fraudulent appraisals. I knew everything because I'd lived through the aftermath, read the court documents, studied the case. Now I had the power to make it all happen faster. I spent 6 months building my case. I hired forensic accountants to dig through Eleanor's financial records. I contacted Eleanor's former employees, the ones she'd fired or screwed over, and got them to talk. I found the environmental reports she'd buried, the inspection records she'd falsified. I built an airtight case. Then I sent it to every regulatory agency I could find. The EPA, the FBI, the State Attorney General's Office, the IRS, the city's fraud division. I sent them everything. The investigation started quietly. Eleanor didn't even notice at first, too busy trying to rebuild after Marcus's divorce had damaged her reputation. Then the subpoenas started arriving. Bank records, business records, communications. Eleanor's empire was built on secrets, and those secrets were being dragged into the light. Her partners started flipping. Her employees started talking. The media started investigating. Within 6 months, Eleanor's entire empire was collapsing. Properties were seized. Assets were frozen. Criminal charges were filed. Fraud, embezzlement, environmental crimes, bribery, conspiracy. 14 felony counts. Eleanor tried to run. She actually tried to flee the country, got as far as the airport before FBI agents arrested her at the gate. The trial took a year. I attended every single day. I sat in the gallery and watched her squirm, watched her cry, watched her try to charm the jury the way she'd charmed everyone else. It didn't work. She was convicted on all 14 counts, 15 years in federal prison. The judge was harsh, condemning Eleanor's callous disregard for human life and environmental safety, and her systematic corruption of public institutions. I watched Eleanor's face as the sentence was read. Watched the moment she realized she'd lost everything. Watched her eyes find mine in the courtroom. She knew. In that moment, she knew I'd done this. I smiled at her. She looked away. Marcus tried to reconcile after his mother was sentenced. It was pathetic. He showed up at my apartment building, my new, beautiful, expensive apartment in a building with excellent security, and tried to talk his way past the doorman. I let him come up. I wanted to see him one more time, wanted to look him in the eye and see what was left of the man I'd once loved. He looked terrible. Older than his years, worn down by failure and stress. His startup had collapsed after Eleanor's arrest. She'd been his primary investor, and her assets had been frozen. He'd lost his apartment, his car, everything. He was working as a junior developer at a mid-sized tech company now, making a fraction of what he'd made before. "I made a mistake," he said when I opened the door. He was holding cheap roses, wilted and sad. "I was young and stupid, and I let my mother manipulate me." "You tried to kill me," I said flatly. His face went pale. I didn't. "You filmed me dying instead of calling for help," I said, and watched him flinch. in another life, in a different timeline. You stood there with your phone out and you watched me choke to death on almonds and you did nothing. That's insane, he said, but his voice was shaking. That never happened. You're you're not well, Alice. You need help. I'm perfectly well, I said. Better than I've ever been, actually. Funny how that works when people stop poisoning me. I never poisoned you. No, I agreed. Your mother did. And my mother. And Rebecca. You just cheated on me, lied to me, manipulated me, and planned to cash in on my insurance policy so much better. I loved you, he said desperately. Stan, I still love you. We could start over. We could. No, I said simply. We couldn't. Because you're a monster, Marcus. You're a murderer who just never got the chance to finish the job, and I want nothing to do with you. Please, he begged. I have nothing. No money, no family, no future. You're successful now. You have everything. Can't you help me for old times' sake? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man who'd married me for money, who'd planned my death with his mistress, who'd valued insurance payouts over my life. No, I said. I can't. And you know what the funny thing is, Marcus? You did this to yourself. You had a wife who loved you, a wife who would have worked with you, supported you, helped you build something real. But you chose greed instead. You chose murder instead, and now you have nothing. That's not fair, he said. Fair? I laughed, and it was bitter. You want to talk about fair? You tried to kill me for $2 million. You failed. And now you get to live with that failure for the rest of your life. That seems perfectly fair to me. I closed the door in his face. He stood outside for a while. I could see him on the security camera. He knocked a few more times, begged through the door, then he left. I never saw him again. Years passed. I built a career, a real one, based on merit and skill and hard work. I'd always been good with numbers, good with patterns. Now I put that to use. I started as a financial analyst working for a mid-sized investment firm. I was cautious at first, careful not to let my knowledge of the future make me too successful too fast. But I couldn't help being good at my job. I knew which companies would explode and which would crash. I knew when to buy and when to sell. I knew market patterns that hadn't emerged yet, technological shifts that were coming. I made my firm a lot of money. Within 2 years, I was a senior analyst. Within 5, I was a partner. Within 10, I'd started my own investment firm, Chen Capital Management. I specialized in helping women invest, in providing financial education and support to women who'd been economically abused or controlled. I remembered what it felt like to have no access to my own money, to be dependent on someone who was actively trying to kill me. I made sure other women never felt that way. The firm grew. By the time I was 35, we were managing over $1 billion in assets. By 40, it was $10 billion. I was wealthy. Really wealthy. Not just comfortable, but powerful. And I used that power for good. I created a foundation. The Alice Chen Foundation for Survivors of Family Abuse. We funded women's shelters. We provided legal aid for domestic violence victims. We offered financial literacy programs and job training. We helped women escape abusive families, start new lives, build their own empires. We saved lives. My mother worked for the foundation. It had been her idea, part of her ongoing amends process. She volunteered at first, then joined the board, then became the director of our family violence prevention program. She was good at it. She understood the dynamics of family abuse in a way few people could because she'd been the abuser. She used that knowledge to help others recognize the warning signs, to intervene before situations escalated to murder. She spoke at events, sharing her story. Not all of it. We agreed to keep the poisoning private, but enough to make a difference. I almost destroyed my daughter, she'd say. I let fear and desperation turn me into someone I didn't recognize. I let other people manipulate me into doing something unforgivable. And every day I work to make sure other families don't make the same mistakes. It was powerful. It was real. It didn't make what she'd done okay. It never would, but it was something. Daniel got sober when he was 30. It took him 3 attempts and 2 rehab stays. but he did it. He left Rebecca. They'd gotten back together briefly after Marcus left her, a toxic reunion that had ended in mutual destruction. He left our mother's house. He left the entire mess behind and started building a real life. We had coffee sometimes, not often. The wounds were too deep for easy friendship, but occasionally. He'd married someone new, a woman named Sarah who worked as a trauma counselor and understood his history. They had 2 kids together. Daniel was a good father, devoted and present in a way our own father never had been. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked me once over coffee on a bright Saturday afternoon. "About what almost happened?" "Every day," I said honestly. "I would have killed myself," he said quietly on after. "I know I would have. The guilt would have eaten me alive." "I know." He looked at me confused. "How could you know?" "Because it did," I said. "In the life where I died, you drank yourself to death within 2 years, liver failure at 35. He stared at me. "That's impossible." "Is it?" I smiled slightly. "Then how do I know about the scar on your left shoulder blade? The one you got falling off a bike when you were 12. The one Mom never took you to get stitched up properly." He'd never told me about that scar. I'd learned about it from his medical examiner's report, from the autopsy after his death. "How?" "I lived another life," I said. "A life where you all succeeded in killing me. Where I died at 33, choking on almonds at my own birthday party. Where you all cashed in my insurance policy and then slowly destroyed yourselves with guilt and greed." "That's crazy." "Maybe," I agreed. "Or maybe I'm just very, very good at reading patterns and predicting outcomes. Either way, I'm giving you a chance to be better. Don't waste it." He didn't. He stayed sober. He raised his kids. He built a life he could be proud of. One day, years later, he sent me a letter. "Thank you," it said, "for saving my life. For seeing something in me worth saving, even after what I did. For giving me the chance to be the brother I should have been. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm grateful for it anyway. I hope I'm making you proud." I kept that letter in my desk drawer. Some betrayals you can forgive, given enough time and genuine change. Some you can't. But you can move forward anyway. I never remarried. Men were interested, certainly. Successful, wealthy, independent. I had all the qualities that made me attractive on paper. And I had lovers, relationships that lasted months or even years. But I never let anyone close enough to hurt me again. I never gave anyone the power to betray me. Maybe that was sad. Maybe I was missing out on something beautiful by keeping everyone at arm's length. But I'd learned my lesson about trust, about love, about the danger of letting people see your vulnerabilities. Better to be alone and safe than partnered and dead. Eleanor died in prison when she was 68. Heart attack, quick and relatively painless, according to the medical report. I didn't attend the funeral. I did send flowers, though. Cheap ones, wilted and sad. The card read, "With deepest sympathy, Alice Chen." Marcus was there. I heard about it from one of the social workers at my foundation who'd seen the obituary and attended out of morbid curiosity. "He looked terrible," she reported. "Old and bitter. He kept talking about how unfair everything was, how his mother had been persecuted, how the system was corrupt." "Did he mention me?" I asked. "He said you destroyed his family." I laughed. "I didn't destroy anything. I just refused to die for them." Rebecca disappeared entirely after her nursing license was revoked. I heard rumors occasionally that she'd moved to Florida, that she'd gotten married to some older man with money, that she'd had kids. I hoped they were okay, those hypothetical children. I hoped she'd learned something from losing everything, but I didn't care enough to check. Some people weren't worth the mental energy. On my 50th birthday, I threw a party. A real one with real friends. People I'd met through work, through the foundation, through my carefully curated life. People who knew me as Alice Chen, the businesswoman, the philanthropist, the survivor. People who had no idea I'd died and been reborn. We celebrated at my beach house in Malibu. Expensive wine, catered food, laughter and joy. Sarah, Daniel's wife, made a toast. To Alice, she said, raising her glass, the strongest woman I know. Thank you for showing us all what it means to survive and thrive. Everyone drank. I looked around at the faces of people who actually cared about me, who valued me alive, who had never once considered me more valuable dead. And I realized I'd won, not just survived, won. I'd outlived their expectations, their plans, their cruelty. I'd turned their poison into my power. I lived to be 93 years old, 93. 60 years longer than they'd planned for me, 60 years of building and growing and thriving. I was sharp until the end. Still running my firm at 90, still managing the foundation, still helping women escape the kind of families I'd escaped. My mother died when she was 85, peaceful in her sleep, holding my hand. We'd made our peace years ago, not forgiveness exactly, but something close. Acceptance. Understanding. Love. Complicated and damaged and real. Daniel died at 70, sober and happy, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He'd spent his last decades as an addiction counselor, helping others fight the demons he'd conquered. At the end, he thanked me again. You saved my life, he said, his voice weak but clear. Not once. Many times. 3 times, I said, thinking of timelines he'd never remember. He smiled, confused but content. 3 times then, thank you. Marcus died alone at 62, broke, bitter, consumed by resentment. I heard about it third hand from someone who'd known someone who'd worked with him. Heart attack. Similar to his mother, no one around to call for help. I felt nothing when I heard. No satisfaction, no grief, no closure. Just nothing. He'd been irrelevant to my life for so long that his death barely registered. Rebecca, I never did find out what happened to Rebecca. She vanished from my world so completely she might as well have never existed. Good riddance. On my last day, I lay in my bed in my beautiful Malibu house, surrounded by flowers and light and the sound of the ocean. My lawyer came to see me. Thomas Kane, now 80 himself, still sharp as ever. Everything's in order, he said. The foundation is fully funded for the next 100 years. Your estate is distributed according to your wishes. Your legacy is secure. Good, I said, my voice thin but satisfied. There's just one thing. He pulled out a familiar document. The life insurance policy. The one you took out at 25. I smiled. I'd forgotten about that. It's been sitting there for 67 years, Kane continued. Never claimed, obviously. With compound interest and investment growth, it's worth over $50 million now. $50 million, from an initial $2 million, the power of time and patience. The trust is still the primary beneficiary? I asked. Yes, everything goes to the foundation, but there's a secondary beneficiary listed, from the original paperwork before you amended it. Who? Rebecca Tate. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. After all these years, after everything, Rebecca's name was still buried in the paperwork. Waiting. Hoping. Change it, I said when I could breathe again. To whom? I thought about it. About justice and irony and the perfect ending to a story that had started with betrayal. The National Alliance for Domestic Violence Prevention, I said. Every penny. Let it help people escape the kind of family that Rebecca represented. Let it save lives that would have been lost to greed and manipulation. Perfect, Kane said, making a note. I died that night. Peacefully, naturally, at 93 years old, having lived exactly the life I'd chosen. Having outlived every single person who'd tried to kill me. Having turned their betrayal into triumph. My obituary was 3 pages long in the New York Times. It detailed my career, my foundation, my impact on thousands of lives. It called me a visionary, a philanthropist, a pioneer in financial services and women's advocacy. It didn't mention Marcus or Eleanor or Rebecca or any of them. They didn't deserve space in my story. At the reading of my will, there was one surprise. I'd left a letter, to be opened and read aloud to anyone who'd ever been named in any of my legal documents. Marcus was there, just to see if he'd get anything. He was old now, gray and bitter, still clinging to hope that I'd shown him some mercy. Daniel was there with his family. My mother's children from her second marriage. She'd remarried in her 60s, found happiness with a kind man who treated her well. They were there out of respect. And Thomas Kane read my letter aloud. To those who tried to kill me for $2 million, I lived to 93. I was worth over $100 million when I died. None of it goes to you, not one penny. Instead, every dollar of my estate goes to help others like me, people betrayed by their families, people who deserved better, people who needed a second chance. You thought I was weak. You thought I was disposable. You thought I was just an obstacle between you and money. You thought my death would be easy, profitable, forgettable. You were wrong. I was stronger than all of you. I outlived you in every sense of the word. I built an empire while you destroyed yourselves. I created a legacy that will help people for generations, while you created nothing but pain and loss. And in the end, the only thing you got from me was this letter, this final message from beyond the grave. I won. You spent years planning my death. I spent decades planning my life. You sought to profit from my murder. I profited from my survival. The life insurance policy you fought over so viciously, the one you poisoned me to claim, the one you manipulated and schemed and betrayed me to get, it's worth $50 million now. Every penny goes to the National Alliance for Domestic Violence Prevention. Not to you. Never to you. I hope it was worth it. I hope the years you spent planning my death, the relationships you destroyed, the crimes you committed, I hope it was all worth getting absolutely nothing in the end. I outlived you all. I outmaneuvered you all. I outsucceeded you all. And my only regret is that I won't be there to see your faces when you realize one final time that I beat you. With absolutely no sympathy, Alice Chen P.S. Marcus, the divorce lawyer you hired cost more than you'll ever see from my estate. Eleanor, your legal fees defending those criminal charges exceeded your entire net worth. Rebecca, your nursing career could have made you millions over a lifetime. You traded it all for nothing. I hope you learned something, though I doubt it. If I could speak from beyond the grave, if I could address anyone reading this story, I'd tell you this. They made me list her as primary on my life insurance policy. They thought it would be easy money. They thought I'd die young and compliant, too sick and scared to fight back. They poisoned me, manipulated me, betrayed me in ways that should have been unthinkable. But I was reborn. I remembered everything. And I spent 67 years making sure they regretted ever underestimating me. I outlived them all, and I made damn sure my death benefited everyone except the people who tried to profit from it. That's not revenge, that's justice. That's not bitterness, that's strength. That's not a tragedy, that's a triumph. I was murdered once, but I was reborn with knowledge, with power, with the ability to change everything. And I did. I changed everything. That's what it means to survive. Not just to live, but to thrive. Not just to escape, but to win. They tried to make my death their profit. I made my life their punishment. And in the end, after 93 years of living well and loving hard and fighting back, I died on my own terms, surrounded by people who actually cared, having built something beautiful from the ashes of their betrayal. That's a life well lived. That's revenge served cold and perfect. That's outliving them all.